Oh boy, Explorers! It was one of my favorites when I was growing up. A group of kids from Maryland, like me, build a spaceship out of a tilt-a-whirl, my favorite carnival ride, and they name it Thunder Road after the song by Bruce Springsteen, my favorite rock star. God, I love this movie. This is a review of the Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode, Explorers. If you have not seen this episode and you don't want to know where the bathroom is on that Bajoran spaceship Sisko builds, be warned, spoilers beyond this point. The A-plot of this one is a Ben and Jake story, hence its inclusion in this Family Matters batch of reviews. And really, what better way is there for a father to bond with his son than to hand-build a replica of an ancient solar sail-powered spaceship and use it to fly millions of miles out into the merciless vacuum of space? It's just like taking a father-son fishing trip on a boat Dad built himself into the middle of the Pacific Ocean if there was no air. Anyway, plot summary on the starboard bow, starboard bow, starboard bow. That's my starboard, not camera starboard. Before we get into the big Sisko father-son trip, we need to start this Dr. Bashir subplot, so we open on Bashir at Quark's, where he is approached by Lita in her first ever appearance. Hi, Lita! She flirts with him by obviously faking a cough. Smart, she knows he likes to sleep with his patients. And Bashir orders them some drinks, but then Dax walks in to cockblock Bashir, and he gets rid of her by passing her a tablet with "Go away" written on it. So Dax goes away. But on her way out, she casually and vindictively mentions to Bashir that the starship Lexington will be stopping off at the station soon. This means something to Bashir, who immediately abandons Lita to chase after Dax. He's like, "Did you say the Lexington?" Dax is like, "Yeah. Hey, don't you know somebody on that ship? Isn't the medical officer Elizabeth Lenz the woman who graduated first in your class at medical school? You know, when you were second in your class because you missed one question on your final exam, you fuck. Anyway, the Lexington docks in 3 weeks. I bet seeing her is gonna be so fun for you." Dax hands Bashir his tablet back and walks off. Bashir's like, "Oh, I see you've erased 'go away' and written 'eat shit.' Nice." Cut to Sisko's quarters, where Jake is hanging out. Then Commander Sisko sweeps in, just back from his trip to Bajor, and he is super excited. He was apparently visiting Bajor to attend the reopening of an ancient library, and now ancient Bajoran stuff is all he can talk about. He sounds like a college student who toured Europe during their gap year, and when they came home, they just would not shut the fuck up about Italy. I'm sure it's wonderful, but I mean, we have wine and naps here too. Anyway, Sisko is particularly excited about the plans he brought home for an ancient Bajoran light ship. 800 years ago, when humans were still dicking around with boats, Bajorans were using solar sail-propelled vessels like this to explore outer space. Of course, those stories are regarded by many as mere legends, but there's one way to prove if the legends could be true. Sisko is going to build and fly a Bajoran lightship of his own. With O'Brien and Kira in tow, Sisko plans to construct his ship in this cargo bay just as soon as they can move all this inconvenient cargo out of the way. Just stack these containers in the hallway or something, I don't give a shit. Sisko informs O'Brien of the shipment of Bajoran lumber he's expecting, and he asks O'Brien to get him a saber saw. O'Brien's like, "A saber saw? Hand tools? Just use a laser cutter, man." But Sisko's like, "No, I want to use the same tools the ancient Bajorans used to build their ships. I'm doing it Woodwright shop style, not New Yankee Workshop style." Sisko gets to work building his ship, and thanks to the magic of montage, it takes no time at all. During a break from the project, he sits down for a meal with Jake and invites Jake to come along with him on his voyage. Sisko plans to take the ship out as far as the Denorius Belt, which would be the most treacherous part of the journey, just to prove that the ancient star sailors could have traveled from Bajor to Kardassia. Jake turns down the invitation, since his girlfriend is coming back from Bajor soon, and flying far away in a little spaceship with his dad will make having sex with her a lot more difficult. Sisko is disappointed, but he understands. Kids today would rather stay home and get laid than go sailing with their parents. It's not like when he was young. Sometime later, Dax drops in on Sisko as he continues work on the ship. She's like, I thought you might be hungry, so I brought you some Popeyes. I know they're not as good since they took jambalaya off the menu, but I still like their mashed potatoes better than KFC. Dax and Cisco talk about Jake. Cisco is worried that Jake's too grown up now to be interested in having adventures with his old man. Dax, referencing her several lifetimes of experience, reassures Ben that he'll still have adventures with Jake, just different ones that heavily involve war and possibly time travel. Meanwhile, Jake gets a message from New Zealand that is apparently good news, so he goes to see his father and announces that he's changed his mind. He does want to go on the sailing trip. Meanwhile, Bashir is studying up on the latest medical research to prepare for the arrival of Elizabeth Lenz, his old academic nemesis, because that's still happening. Later, Gul Dukat calls Cisco and says, "Hey, man, what are you doing? Flying a replica of an ancient lightship to prove the Bajarians could have sailed to Cardassia 800 years ago? That's a fairy tale." Yeah, and it's called The Tale of the Grumpy Cardassian. What? Sorry, I've had a lot on my mind with building this ship and everything. I couldn't think of something witty. Okay. The Cardassian is grumpy because his assumptions about the range of ancient Bajaran spacecraft were proven wrong. Got it. Cisco and Jake push off and everything goes really well to start with. They deploy all the sails, no problem. Jake finds the bathroom, which Cisco cautions was designed with zero gravity in mind, even though he has set his commitment to authenticity far enough aside to install artificial gravity. Jake's like, the toilet is on the ceiling. How am I supposed to take a shit? Cisco takes a moment to appreciate what they're doing, sailing out into space with no engine, surrounded by stars, propelled by starlight. Just imagine how the ancient Bajarans who did this must have felt. It's pretty incredible. Jake tells Cisco that there's something they need to talk about. Cisco's like, uh-oh, this sounds bad. Then Jake hands him a tablet and says, "First, I want you to read this piece of short fiction I wrote." And Cisco's like, "It's worse than I thought." Back on DS9, the Lexington has arrived, and the famous Elizabeth Lenz is hanging out in Quarks with some of her fellow officers, while Bashir and O'Brien are sitting at a nearby table, and Bashir is trying to work up the nerve to go say hi to her. Quark drops by and says, "By the way, Morn and I have a bet. He says you and Dr. Lenz won't get beyond awkward small talk, but I say you're going to make it to at least second base, whatever that means." Lenz gets up from her table and walks toward Bashir and O'Brien's table. Bashir stands up expectantly as she approaches, but she just passes by, not even looking at him. I really like her, you guys. Back on the lightship, Cisco has read Jake's short story, and Jake's like, "So what do you think?" Cisco says, "I liked it. I think it shows a lot of promise." Jake's like, "Whoa, pump the brakes, Pops. Promise? What the hell is that? Look, I said I liked it. You're only 17. You've been writing for like 5 minutes. What do you expect me to say? I expect you to say you love it. I expect you to say it's the greatest short story ever written. I expect you to say it's so good it makes you want to turn this ship around and sail it to Earth and dig up the grave of Guy de Maupassant and piss on his bones." I can't say that, but speaking of piss, can you please make more of an effort to clean up after yourself in the bathroom? I know it's challenging having the urinal mounted upside down on the wall like that, but come on, Jake. Jake reveals that he's been accepted for a writing scholarship at the Pennington School in New Zealand. That's what the message he received earlier was about. Cisco congratulates Jake, but before they can talk about it much more, the ship is rocked as one of the masts breaks. Cisco can't fix it and has no choice but to jettison the busted mast. Despite the setback, they resolve to push on. Back on DS9, Bashir and O'Brien are getting drunk and singing. Apparently getting the cold shoulder from Elizabeth Lenz really bothers Bashir. O'Brien says, "Don't let it get you down. You run hot and cold with people. They either love you or they hate you. Take me, for example. When I first met you, I hated you." Bashir's like, "But now?" O'Brien's like, "Now? I mean, I don't not hate you." Moved by O'Brien's stirring declaration of friendship, Bashir stands up and says, "I'm gonna go confront Elizabeth Lenz. I'm gonna get right up in her face and ask her who the fuck she thinks she is walking past me like that." O'Brien's like, "Good plan, but maybe wait until tomorrow since I just noticed you seem to have pissed yourself for the 3rd time." Shit. I'll take your word for that one. It doesn't show, and the smell must not have made it to this side of the room yet. Jake tells Cisco that he's decided to defer admission and do that Pennington Fellowship next year. Cisco thinks it's because Jake's worried about being on his own for so long for the first time, but Jake finally admits that he's actually more concerned about his dad. "If I leave, you'll be all alone," Jake says. Sisko waves that off as no big deal. I won't be alone, Jake. I'll have plenty of people to keep me company. I could have dinner with Dax or Dr. Bashir or Odo. He doesn't eat, but I'm his boss. He'll watch me eat if I tell him to. The ship is rocked again, and this time, whatever it is has accelerated the ship to warp speed. Then the acceleration stops, and the ship drops back down to sublight. Sisko checks the star chart and surmises that tachyon eddies known to exist in this part of space must have pushed them briefly up to warp speed. The problem is, now they're who knows how far off course, and Sisko's astrolabe is broken, so they have no hope of figuring out their location. The only thing to do is pull out the emergency communicator Sisko brought along and send an SOS to Deep Space Nine so someone can bring a runabout to pick them up. Back on DS9, Elizabeth Lenz is at Quark's again, and Bashir is watching her from across the bar like a creep. He finally screws up his courage, walks over, and introduces himself. Hi, I'm Julian Bashir. We went to medical school together. Oh, Bashir! Okay, yeah. Sorry, I thought you were Andorian. See, I remember that you exist, but I haven't been carrying around any unresolved angst related to you all these years, so there's really no reason for me to give a shit about you. If it makes you feel better, though, I hate my boring-ass job on the Lexington and wish I had asked for this assignment instead. This seems like a really fun place to work. It is. We all almost die on a weekly basis. You want to see my office? Sure. And they head off to the infirmary together. The camera tilts up to find Morn and Quark looking on from the balcony, and Quark's like, leaving the bar together, that's second base, give me my money. Sisko and Jake are sitting around in their ship, waiting to either be rescued or die. Jake mentions that he knows a lady who wants to meet Sisko, a freighter captain. Sisko's like, okay, look, I'll go out on a date with this freighter captain, but only if you promise not to base your decision about going to the Pennington School on how well our date goes. Deal? Deal. Wait, did you wash your hands after the last time you used the bathroom? Jake looks out one of the portholes and notices 3 Cardassian ships approaching. I wonder what they want. Gul Dukat hails them on Sisko's emergency communicator and says, "Hey! Congratulations! You made it all the way to Cardassian territory and proved that the ancient Bajarans could have done it too. I always knew you could do it. Also, by total coincidence, we just discovered the crash site of one of those ancient Bajaran ships on Cardassia, so I guess it wasn't a fairy tale after all. Plus, it means that technically the Bajarans invaded us first, so the occupation was totally justified. Hit the fireworks, boys! The end!" It's actually a nice, heartwarming ending, with Sisko and Jake embracing in their moment of triumph as Gul Dukat is forced to celebrate their accomplishment. I just tainted it with my signature brand of cynical sarcasm. You know how I do. This is the kind of episode that made me really fall in love with Deep Space Nine as a series. Don't get me wrong, I dig the more conventional plot-driven shows where there's a threat to the ship/station, or a clear moral dilemma to grapple with, or a political commentary being made. A Star Trek series should do all of that stuff, and Deep Space Nine is great at those things. But I love character-driven stories like this one, where there's no crisis, no mystery to be solved, no enemy to be defeated, just compelling character studies that allow us to spend time with our heroes, but in ways that don't feel like wastes of time. The Sisko story is obviously the main draw of this one, but I want to start with the Bashir subplot because it's also excellent and is important in its own way. First off, I love how the Bashir plot and the Sisko plot have nothing to do with each other at all, and it feels like you could have grafted the Bashir plot onto any other episode and it would have worked just as well. Ordinarily, I don't like that sort of thing. I prefer more unity. If an episode has multiple plots, they don't necessarily need to all be about the same thing, but they should have things in common, parallel themes, or characters dealing with similar problems but in different ways, or taking separate approaches. But here, and in other DS9 episodes structured the same way, it works because it reinforces the sense that this space station is a place full of diverse, interesting people, and something is always happening somewhere. The Bashir story and the Sisko story aren't so completely different that you can't find any shared qualities between them. For example, they both center on characters who become deeply preoccupied with one particular thing. Sisko with building and flying his lightship, and Bashir with the impending visit from his old rival from medical school. but those commonalities don't jump out at you and certainly don't feel contrived. This is an important episode for Bashir's character development. We're late in season 3 here, and he's already outgrown his initial brash young know-it-all phase, but he hasn't quite matured into who he eventually becomes in the show's later seasons either. Here, we see Bashir's outward cockiness undercut by a sudden attack of insecurity. The one person who outperformed him in medical school, the woman who claimed the valedictorian spot that would have been his had he only not gotten that one question wrong on the final, is coming here to his turf. And he learns this information right when he's in the middle of a flirtation with Lita. He's working his confident, charming ladies' man gimmick, classic early Dr. Bashir, and then the rug is pulled out by Dax, of all people, the woman he crushed on embarrassingly hard in the first couple of seasons. Everything about that scene is great. From Bashir's instant annoyance at the interrupting presence of Dax, his former object of affection, to Bashir's sudden panic at the mention of the Lexington, to the shit-eating grin Dax displays for the entire thing. Then Bashir goes on a little emotional journey throughout the episode. Yeah, if he were a more mature guy, the facts that he finished second in his class and that the woman who finished first is coming to the station wouldn't bother him, but he's not that more mature guy. He's a ball of self-doubt with a facade of self-assurance. That moment when he stands up to meet Elizabeth Lenz and she walks right past him without so much as a look is painfully funny and just plain painful. He's been beating his head against the wall for weeks over the prospect of seeing her, and when she finally gets here, he's invisible to her. So he crashes out, which leads to one of my favorite scenes of the whole series, Bashir's drunken sing-along and commiseration session with O'Brien. It's funny, it's touching, the acting is great, and seasoned with little authentic moments, like when O'Brien stops Bashir from refilling his whiskey glass with a slurred "no, no, no," while they're in the middle of singing Jerusalem. They seem like two people who are friends, real friends. Bashir is vulnerable, O'Brien is supportive and vulnerable up to a point. The moment where he tells Bashir that he loves him without actually saying the words is perfectly set up by the writing and flawlessly performed by Colomini and Siddig El-Fadil, who had not yet switched to being credited as Alexander Siddig at this point. And ultimately, Bashir reaches the end of this particular journey, makes peace with Elizabeth Lenz, and more importantly, with himself, and realizes that none of that stuff he's been so anxious about really matters. Sure, she got the honor of graduating first in their class. She got her pick of assignments. She chose the Lexington, which was apparently the spot that almost everyone wanted. But Bashir wasn't part of the almost everyone. He got the assignment he wanted here on Deep Space Nine. The fact that he finished second in his class didn't matter. He didn't actually lose anything. In fact, he came out on top in the end, because it sounds like Dr. Lenz's job really bites, and she seems extremely envious of the work Bashir has been doing. Bashir is forced to wrestle with his doubts about himself. He is humbled, but he also gains perspective and comes out of this experience with a better, stronger understanding of who he is. I've never been invited to address students at a graduation ceremony, and I never will be, because why? But if I ever were to be invited to give such an address, one thing I would tell them is to be proud of the work they've done, be proud of what they've achieved in school, but to also remember that for most of them, in 5 years, none of it will seem important at all. When you're in school, high school and college, they're the same thing in this context, I think. What's happening seems so important. The highs are so high, the lows are so low. When things are going great, you're on top of the world, and when things are going poorly, it's like your life is over. But once you get through that and gain some distance, and you start to figure out life as an adult, you realize that, yeah, what you did in school matters, but it doesn't matter nearly as much as you thought it would while you were in the middle of it. And for those of you wondering how I square Bashir's characterization here with the later revelation that he's a genetically engineered secret super genius, I don't. I have no headcanon, I have no rationalization, I don't need one. When this episode was written, the notion of Bashir being genetically modified had not yet been conceived, so when I watch this episode, none of that exists. And Bashir is as he appears to be in this story. See how easy that is? Turning now to the A story, Ben and Jake Sisko's father-son sailing trip, the relationship between Ben and Jake is something else that sets Deep Space Nine apart from and above other Star Trek shows for me. Explorers is one of the series' highlights as far as Ben and Jake go. It's not as epic and emotionally devastating as The Visitor, but it gives us a more complete view of their dynamic together. The emotional notes being played here are familiar to anyone who has ever been a child or a parent. So I think that's just about all of us covered. Jake is growing up, starting to think about taking his first steps away from his father, while Ben is noticing that Jake is growing up and wants to take pride in his son's maturity and coming independence, but also wants to stop time and keep him close and continue to enjoy their life together. It's poignant. And like most of the Ben and Jake-centered stuff in the show, it rings true. The conversation the two of them have about Jake's short story is one of the most authentic versions of that conversation I've ever seen in a TV show or a movie. Having been on both sides of that conversation many times in my life, I recognize both the caution on Sisko's part and the combination of disappointment and offense shown by Jake at his father's not as enthusiastic as he'd hoped response. The truth is, if this were real life, Jake's story probably isn't that great. He's obviously not a bad writer. He got that fellowship to the Pennington School after all, which seems kind of prestigious, but he's a teenager who's only been serious about writing for a very short time. It shows a lot of promise, is probably the most honest and most supportive thing Ben could say to Jake. He doesn't want to offer his son bland, uncritical praise, but he doesn't want to pick the story apart and point out every single thing that's wrong with it either. It can be stressful offering feedback to a writer when that writer is someone you care about. If you don't think the work is as good as they think it is, you need to find a way of communicating that, which is honest, but that doesn't hurt their feelings. And if you're the writer, and you were hoping for an astonished, enthusiastic 5-star rave review, hearing, "I like it, it shows a lot of promise," in a carefully considered tone, can feel like a knife in your heart. I feel for Ben, and I feel for Jake. The Ben and Jake segments of the episode work so well because the characters and their relationship are so clearly established, and because Avery Brooks and Sirach Lofton have such effortless chemistry. It's always a joy to watch them work together. But this story also succeeds because of how creatively conceived and realized the scenario is. I love everything about the idea of Bajoran lightships. I love the direct parallels to seagoing sailing ships. I love the thought of Bajoran astronauts using these vessels to travel through space 800 years ago, which would be like 400 years ago for us. I love the fact that there are actual theories for how to build real spacecraft that could be powered by solar sails. They'd be a lot different than the ship we see in the episode. The sails would be way, way, way bigger for one thing, but there's still an essence of truth to the concept, and I dig that. Some of you might ask, but how did the ancient Bajorans get those wooden solar sailing ships into space in the first place? And to you I say, shut the fuck up. The design of the lightship is beautiful. The majestic exterior with its solar sails unfurled, and the elegant interior with its wood and brass details and cranks and levers, giving the operation of the ship a sense of weight and tactile reality, even though the whole thing is utterly ludicrous. I don't think it could have looked any better even if it had been made out of a tilt-a-whirl. The sailing scenes have an almost total lack of technobabble, which is always a blessing during this era of Star Trek. And yet, through the use of some actual sailing jargon, as well as simple explanations of what's going on, like Sisko informing Jake that they're going to be tacking against the light, and then making appropriate adjustments to the course and orientation of the ship throughout the show, the episode successfully creates the impression that they're actually doing something. They're really sailing this little wooden ship through outer space. It feels like the producers decided to take a break from Star Trek for a week and make a Jules Verne or H.G. Wells pastiche instead. Explorers was written by Renee Echevarria from a story by Hilary J. Bader and directed by Cliff Bowl. It focuses on Sisko and Jake and Bashir and O'Brien, but also gives Dukat and Dax brief opportunities to shine and introduces Lita. It even finds little funny moments for Quark and for Odo, who materializes for one scene to gently tease Bashir while informing him of the Lexington's arrival. It's kind of a perfect episode. I really don't have anything bad to say about it. If only Jake's short story had been this good, then Sisko wouldn't have had to choose his words so carefully when commenting on it. Those are my thoughts on Explorers. What do you think of this episode? Please share your thoughts with me in the comments. If you'd like to support this channel, and I sure wish you would, if you can afford it, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, or by making a one-time gift by clicking the thanks button or via PayPal or Venmo. Links are in the description. Please join me next time as this batch of reviews of episodes centered on family matters continues. We'll stick around Deep Space Nine for one more week, though we will jump ahead a few years from Season 3 to Season 7 for a look at an episode titled Prodigal Daughter. See you next time for that one. Thanks for watching, and take care, everybody.